cellophane. Insert paper.
The formulation of general semantics resulting from a general theory of time binding supplies the scientists and the laymen with a general modern method of orientation, which eliminates the older psychological blockages and reveals the mechanisms of adjustment. The departure from Aristotelianism. The departure from Aristotelianism will allow biologists, physiologists, etc., and particularly medical men to think in modern colloidal and quantum terms. Instead of the antiquated chemical and physiological terms, medicine may then become a science in the 1933 sense. In psychiatry, it indicates on colloidal grounds the solution of the body-mind problem. It shows clearly that desirable human characteristics have a definite psychophysiological mechanism which, up until now, has been misused to the detriment of all of us. It gives the first definition of consciousness in simpler physiochemical terms. A general theory of sanity leads to a general theory of psychotherapy, including all such existing medical schools, as they all deal with disturbances of the somatic reactions, psychological responses to words and other stimuli in connection with their meanings. It formulates a physiological foundation for mental hygiene, which turns out to be a most general preventive psychophysiological experimental method. It shows the psychophysiological foundation of the childhood of humanity, as indicated by the infantilism in our present private, public, and international lives. In biology, it gives the semantic and structural solution of the organism as a whole problem.
Oh, that's weird.
In physiology and neurology, it reformulates to human levels the Pavlov theory of conditional reflexes, suggesting a new scientific mathematics and its teaching. All language can be considered as names either for unspeakable entities on the objective level, be it things or feelings, or as names or relations. In fact, even objects as such could be considered as relations between the microscopic events and the human nervous system. If we inquire what the last relations represent, we might find that an object represents an abstraction of low order produced by our nervous systems as the result of submicroscopic events acting as stimuli upon the nervous system. If the object represents abstractions of some order, then obviously when we come to the inquiry as in language, we find that words are still higher abstractions from objects under each conditions. No. Under such conditions, a theory of meaning looms up naturally. If the objects, as well as words, represent abstractions of different order, an individual A cannot know what B abstracts unless B him, and so the meaning of a word must be given by a definition. And this would lead to the dictionary meaning of words, provided we could define all our words. But this is impossible. If we were to attempt to do so, we should soon find that our vocabulary was exhausted, and we should reach a set of terms which could not be any further defined from lack of words. We thus see that all linguistic schemes, if analyzed far enough, would depend on a set of undefined terms. If we inquire about the meaning of a word, we find that it depends on the meaning of other words used in defining it, and that the eventual new relations positioned between them ultimately depend on the MO meanings of the undefined terms, which at a given period cannot be elucidated any further. Naturally, any fundamental theory of meaning cannot avoid this issue, which must be crucial. Here, a semantic experiment suggests itself. I have performed this experiment repeatedly on myself and others, invariably with similar results. Imagine that we are engaged in a friendly, serious discussion with someone, and that we decide to inquire into the meanings of words. For this special experiment, it is not necessary to be very exacting, as this would enormously, and unnecessarily complicate the experiment. It is useful to have a piece of paper and a pencil to keep a record of the progress. The dictionary meaning of structure is given somewhat as follows. Structure, manner in which a building or organism or other complete whole is constructed, supporting framework or whole of the essential parts of something. The structure of a house, machine, animal, organ, poem, sentence of loose structure. Its structure is ingenious in ornament, should emphasize and not disguise the lines of structure. The implications of the term structure are clear. Even from its daily sense to have structure, we must have a complex of ordered and interrelated parts. One of the fundamental functions of mental processes is to distinguish. We distinguish objects by certain characteristics which are usually expressed by adjectives. If, by a higher order abstraction, we consider individual objects not in some perfectly fictitious isolation, but as they appear empirically as members of some aggregate or collection of objects, we find characteristics which belong to the collection and not to an isolated object. Such characteristics as arise from the fact that the object belongs to a collection called relations. In such collections, we have the possibility of ordering the objects, and so, for instance, we may discover a relation that one object is before or after the other, or that A is the father of B. There are many ways in which we can order a collection, many relations which we can find. It is important to notice that order and relations are, for the most part, empirically present, and that, therefore, this language is fit to represent the facts as we know them. The structure of the actual world is such that it is impossible entirely to isolate an object. An A, Aristotelian subject-predicate language, with its tendency to treat objects as in isolation and to have no place for relations, impossible in complete isolation. Obviously, it has a structure most similar to the structure of the world, in which we deal only with collections, of which the members are related. Obviously, under such empirical conditions, only language originating in the analysis of collections, and therefore the language of relations order, would have a similar structure to the world around us. Consciousness of abstracting. We are subjected not only to all external stimuli, but also to a large number of permanently operating internal semantic stimuli, against which we have had as yet very little protective psychophysiological means. Such structurally powerful semantic stimuli are found in our doctrines, metaphysics, language, attitudes. These do not belong to the objective external world, and so the animals do not have them in a like degree, as far as mental data free thought it might be. Inquiry has shown, in practically all mental ills, a confusion of orders of abstractions appears as a factor. When we confuse the orders of abstractions and ascribe objective reality to terms and symbols, or confuse conclusions and interferences with descriptions, a great deal of semantic suffering is permanent.
myself.
The immature evaluations. This semantic mechanism is well organized yet puzzling. It shows that it is more difficult to influence the affective than to affect the rationalization. One may rationalize perfectly well, yet this lower centers will not be affected sufficiently. It is possible that the confusion of orders of abstractions or identification is, in the main, responsible for it. With the use of the structural differential and the training in the orders of abstractions and in silence on the objective levels, we gain seemingly extremely powerful psychophysiological means of an entirely general character to influence directly the affective responses in which we are aided by the utilization of all available nerve centers. It also shows once more how persistent is the working of the organism as a whole. The harm was done by organism as a whole methods, affecting higher and lower centers. The protective semantic agencies should employ similar means.
Yeah, very fancy, man.
The introduction of new terms is in a language always represents initial difficulties to the student. It is always advisable, if only possible, to introduce terms which are structurally close to the daily experience. At present, in physics, we have a dual language, one of space-time, in which matter is connected somehow with its curvature, the other of the quanta. The structure of both languages is quite different, and at present, scientists have not succeeded in translating one language to the other. Again, 1933. Einstein, in his latest unified field theory, has succeeded by the introduction of new notions in amalgamating the electromagnetic phenomena with the general theory of relativity. But even this new language does not include the quantum theory. For my purpose, it is important to amalgamate both languages as an intuitive pictorial device, which, from a technical point of view, still awaits formulation. As the space-time continuum is the closest to our daily experience, I accept the language of events as fundamental and oddly only a few pictorial notions taken from the quantum theory. Ancestors were building their language. Quite naturally, they started with the lowest orders of abstractions, which are the most immediately connected with the outside world. They established a language of sensations. Like infants, they identified their feelings with the outside world and personified most of the outside events. This primitive semantic tendency resulted in the building of a new language in which the is of identity was fundamental. If we saw an animal and called it dog, and saw another animal roughly resembling the first, we said, quite happily, it is a dog, forgetting or not knowing that the objective level is unspeakable, and that we deal only with the absolute individuals, each one different from the other. Thus, the mechanism of identification or confusion of orders of abstractions, natural at a very primitive stage of human development, became systematized and structurally embodied in this most important tool of daily use called language.